Welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. I am at Johnny Freakin F1, Johnny Freakin Fantasy. This is Steve from Average Joe's at AVG Joe's underscore FF. Welcome to our pod tonight. What we're going to look at is we're going to dive into the wide receiver position, specifically looking at wide receivers who we believe in based on their average draft position, based on their overall rank. When we look at all players, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, players at the wide receiver position that you should focus on, that we believe in for the 2024 year. So, in order to do this, we ended up looking at redraft rankings. This is not dynasty rankings. This is strictly redraft rankings. So what we're going to do is I have two columns here. One on the left, you see wide receiver rank. That's strictly 1 through 50, all the way through 1 through 50 in numerical order. Now, when we're looking at overall ranking, this is where ADP comes into play. If you look at number 9 receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr., he's ranked 9, but his average draft position is 13. So that's really what we're keying in on here based on where these guys are going in drafts that are happening right now or going to happen soon. And these are the projections. We're going to tell you who to believe in. And so I have 5 names and Steve has 5 names. And before we get into our first name, I wanted to mention a promo that Trophy Smack is running right now. So it's draft season, folks. Believe it or not, we're here. We're talking about wide receiver rankings for this upcoming 2024 year. Get ahead of the game right now with Trophy Smack's gorgeous draft boards, complete with player stickers so deep you couldn't possibly need them all. And for the first time, Trophy Smack has an IDP expansion pack for all of our defensive nerds. So check out the link in the show notes and get your draft board, your draft kit today. All right, moving into my first guy here. You know what? I tried not to look at the top five. Top 5, you can make a case for any of these guys to, have a repeat stellar year. I went down a notch and cut outside of the top 5, moving into the top 10. But my first guy is the number 10 guy right here, and that's being Drake London from Atlanta. Drake London is 10th in the wide receiver rankings, going on average off the board at pick 14. The reason I back London here, and this is maybe I wouldn't be doing this a year ago or 2 years ago as a rookie. I really didn't like Drake London to this point, but the moves that Atlanta has made in the offseason, they bring in a new head coach, Raheem Morris. They bring in a new offensive coordinator in Zach Robinson from the Rams last year. I think this is the year for the Drake London's actually going to hit big. I know a lot of people were banking on it the rookie year. Last year just didn't come to fruition, and maybe a lot of teammates in your leagues are reminded of that and have a sour taste in their mouth. But I'm here to tell you that Drake London is worth the pick in a 10-12 team league. This is the first round, folks. So I believe Drake London should be picked in the first round. Like I said, there's been great moves in the offseason. A move, perhaps the biggest move I didn't mention yet, was Kirk Cousins signing in Atlanta. And while Kirk Cousins is coming off an Achilles injury, he's older. This is a new team. It's not money in the bank to click, but I am believing in Kirk Cousins here. If we look over the past 5 years, when we look at 2022, Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins' number 1 target, was wide receiver 1. Okay, take a year ago, 2021, wide receiver 4, Justin Jefferson. 2020, Justin Jefferson was a wide receiver 6. 2019, Stephon Diggs was a wide receiver 24. 2018, wide receivers 7 and 10 being Diggs and Adam Thielen, even going back to the earlier days of Cousins' career. I just think that these stats speak for themselves. Every year it seems to be that at least one of Kirk Cousins' wide receivers does exceptionally well. And I think that guy this year is going to be Drake London. Also, last year before the Achilles injury, Kirk Cousins was on pace to lead the league in passing yards, which I would be surprised if he did that this year if it happened again. But at the same time, he was in a good trajectory. He was in a good landing spot on good pace. So I continue to believe in that for Kirk Cousins moving into Atlanta. New coaching here. I'm excited for it. I think things are really going to shake up. And the last thing about Drake London, actually the last 2 things, he's really good in the red zone. He had 15 red zone targets last year. He had a little bit of a down year when it comes to touchdowns. I believe he only had on the screen 4 here. two receiving touchdowns. But I expect those numbers to come up if you're getting 15 or more red zone looks. And this is a team who did not throw the ball last year that much. And I'm really not scared of anybody else on that team. Kyle Pitts maybe helps because it's somebody to help draw attention off. But other than him, I'm not really scared of who they have there in Atlanta, Steve. So my number one guy is going to be at or number 10 off the board, 10 overall. 10 in our wide receiver rankings, but 14 off the board. Drake London. Who you got for me first?
So what you're saying is Kirk Cousins helped Justin Jefferson get paid. So that's what I got out of that one.
He definitely did that. They helped each other.
I have someone that came out of that same class as my first player that I feel like deserves a little bit more respect and you should be targeting. Is going to be Chris Olave. Now, Olave I had higher ranked than London coming out of college. He has had so far the better pro career in the couple of years that they have played. A lot of it's quarterback play, right? You definitely had some issues with Drake London. He didn't have a quarterback until really this year, so we'll see how he really does perform. Olave has Derek Carr. I know a lot of people will have questions about Derek Carr, but at the end of the day, Derek Carr, he can still sling the ball. You know, whether you think he's a good quarterback or not, he'll get Olave targets, and really, there's no one that's going to take targets away from him. You know, they don't have a stellar tight end. They don't have a stellar wide receiver too. Like their running game is what they have the best as far as options with, Kendrick Miller and Alvin Kamara. So Olave is going to be force fed plenty of options and targets, whether it be red zone, deep balls, middle, intermediate. I mean, it doesn't matter. And Olave has done a good job. Olave does need to get a little bit more, I would say, opportunities in the red zone. I would love to see, but I think Olave at wide receiver 12, I think should be higher. Especially when you look at, no disrespect, but Marvin Harrison Jr. in a redraft format should not be ranked this high. No one knows what that's going to look like yet, but I don't disagree with what you said with London. I think London is in a good spot, especially since he really hasn't had a good quarterback. I still think Olave's talent is a little bit higher, so they're both neck and neck. I mean, wide receiver 10, wide receiver 12, so they're both around that same area. So, when you're in that draft, you're at the end of the first round, early second round. Both of those players would do really well for you as your wide receiver one. And I don't treat them anything less than that.
Yeah, man, I like Olave a lot myself. I had him in a few leagues last year. People didn't really give him the respect. I was trying to trade him for a better receiver, and they said, give me someone better. I'm like, Chris Olave's damn good, man. So absolutely inside the top 12. I think he belongs there too. And yeah, definitely somebody who I'm putting a vote of confidence in with my drafts. He's consistent. I think he might have a chance to even get better. Like you said, if he gets some red zone looks, I love Olave. So love that pick. I am going to move down the board quite a bit here and go with the 23rd wide receiver off the board, and that is DK Metcalf. And I'll tell you why. DK Metcalf, a lot of people understand that he had a down year, which is true. It was a real big down year. It was actually his lowest output as far as receptions since his rookie year in 2019, the year he had 58. So not much lower, but at the same time, targets were down too. You look at the number there as far as DK Metcalf, a number that stands out to me. If you see on the right, I have the first column with 119. That's how many targets he had, 119 targets and only 66 receptions. So just over half of his balls thrown to, he caught. So that's an outlier number. I expect the targets may not come up too much, maybe 125, 130, something like that, maybe his average. Again, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba. We have Lockett in this offense, and maybe that's dropping DK Metcalf in the ranks a bit. But you still had over 1,100 yards. And you know what? 8 touchdowns for DK Metcalf that's a bad year for DK Metcalf. That's down. He averages actually with last year included, he still averages over 8, actually 8.5 touchdowns in his career. So I expect him to bounce back in that aspect too. He gets a new head coach. Pete Carroll's out. They bring in Mike McDonald, new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. I really like the situation that he's in right now. And one thing, if you went back and you pay attention to the offensive line, defensive line, those kind of not sexy positions, the offensive line in Seattle was really ravaged last year, really banged up. Wasn't able to keep Geno Smith, afloat to let him throw the ball. And Geno Smith He might be later on in his career, only 1 or 2 years left, but Geno Smith, if you can protect him well and buy him time to throw the ball, he's somebody as it is right now who he'll stand there and take a hit. Geno Smith's not afraid, but if you can buy him some time and let him find DK Metcalf, even Smith and Jigba, Lockett, these guys downfield, I think that it's really going to be a good year for Seattle. I think their offense is going to rebound really well. So I expect double-digit touchdowns. He did it in 2021. He did it in 2022. So I'm expecting him to return to that double-digit touchdown floor. So I think that's one thing that where if you're looking for touchdowns, which who isn't, if you really that's something that you're banking on. I think DK Metcalf is going to rebound there nicely. Now I do think Smith and Jigba will get his. Maybe he breaks out too, but not enough to drop DK Metcalf to 23rd overall in the wide receiver rankings and 32nd in overall, ADP, Steve. So that's who my second guy is, DK Metcalf.
Yeah, DK's always been in that weird spot. Like he's never been considered a wide receiver one ever in his career, really. I mean, he's always been kind of treated as that wide receiver two, and I kind of feel guilty of it too because there's too many times I've gone into a redraft or even a dynasty and then Metcalf's there and I end up going somewhere else because it's just something that just keeps me away from grabbing him. And then, of course, when the season happens, I'm like, damn it, I had the chance, and then something, So I do agree that he gets disrespected. So I am curious how the offense is going to be. Right, you've got Geno Smith who didn't play as well as he did the year before. Now he's got somebody on his heel in Sam Howell. At least I think so.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that plays out. I got a guy right behind Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. Just the disrespect for this guy. I don't know what it is. I mean, wide receiver 24 right now. Yeah, he was wide receiver 13 last year. He was wide receiver 20 before, wide receiver 17. So like his worst year, if you're not counting his rookie season, was wide receiver 20. As you can see in here, 156 targets. He gets force fed quite a bit. And that was even with the emergence of Josh Downs last season. I get the quarterback situation is different, right? You had Gardner Minshew, who I think actually is a decent quarterback. You've got Anthony Richardson, hopefully coming back healthy. I know he's still dealing with his shoulder. And they did grab, AD Mitchell as well. So maybe now there's another player to take some targets. I still think Pittman is the clear-cut wide receiver one. I do think he's going to still get 120 to 130 targets his way and still clear that possible top 20 spot in wide receiver. I think he is a high-level wide receiver two with maybe if he has a crazy season, low wide receiver one. Like that's where he's at. And he just continues to get disrespected in this offense, and I don't get it. And I will gladly take him every single draft if you're going to let him fall there.
Yeah, man, disrespect for sure. And one thing with Pittman's game is he had 6 touchdowns his second year, and this year it dwindled down a little bit. He ended up only with 4 receiving touchdowns. Maybe a lot of people are hesitant, like maybe Anthony Richardson. With Jonathan Taylor there, Richardson, they're going to run the ball in. That might be the case. That's the only knock I could say for Pittman, but I absolutely love the guy. I think the receptions will be there next year. I think the targets will be there. I think this is really a player who's now a vet, who's now blossoming and taking things to the next level. So I think he actually helps Anthony Richardson out to show respect there and call a spade a spade. So I really like Pittman a lot. Before we go into my next guy, my number 3 guy, I wanted to mention that right now at IDP Plus, we are not just doing podcasts, doing great articles, and we're not just pretty faces. We actually have an entire suite of tools and rankings for both offense and defense, plus rookie rankings, injury trackers, snap tools, premium articles, and more. So right now, get your first month subscription for just $1 with the promo code MOCKDRAFT when you check out. So again, go to idpguys.org. When you check out and subscribe, you will get your first month of IDP Plus premium access for only $1 when you use the promo code MOCKDRAFT. So make sure you go ahead and do that if you haven't already. Okay, moving into my number 3 guy. I'm not going to trail you too much here. I'm not going to go back to back. You took the guy after Metcalf and Pittman, but I'm going to move down a little bit and go take a look at my boy at number 30 here on the bottom of our screen, George Pickens. Now, George Pickens, a little bit inconsistent these first 2 years, actually led the league with players who caught 25 or more catches. He led the league with 18.1 yards per catch, which is pretty impeccable. He's a great downfield threat. He's not just that; he can do run routes in the middle of the field. He can do shorter slants, post, that kind of thing. But really, what we're looking at is the downfield specialty here, and that's who he was. That's what track record will tell you. But when I try to look in the future, I see a guy who's only 23 years old, who's going to be in his third year in the league. The Steelers made great offensive, defensive moves. They brought in Russell Wilson, which if you're in Pittsburgh like me, you have to admit that this is a big upgrade from Kenny Pickett. So I'm excited to see what Russell Wilson does. I don't think Russell Wilson has to set the world on fire to do well with George Pickens. I think if Russell Wilson keeps his head afloat, does a decent job, I think the team helps him out too. That's Wilson being, but I think that George Pickens is in a prime spot here, losing Deontay Johnson, getting Russell Wilson as his quarterback, somebody who can throw the ball downfield, unlike Pickett. So you know what? It's not to say you look at the stats and something happened overnight. I think it's just a player who's still young, who's developing, who's taking it kind of one-dimensional and kind of growing year by year and becoming a full player. So that's how I see it. Right now, they have Deontay Johnson left. They have really no number one wide receiver, so he is by default. Behind them, they have Calvin Austin, a couple other players they signed, but nobody I'm really looking at besides Pat Freiermuth there at tight end. I really like him too. So George Pickens, when we look at the receptions here, only 63 last year on 106 targets. I expect both those numbers to go up. Maybe those 5 touchdowns there turn into 7 or 8 with a few long deep balls. So I think George Pickens, you have to see this. You have to spin this in a way where you can see it. Obviously, like I said, we haven't seen it yet. This is a leap of faith for George Pickens, but I'm not even just being a homer with this pick. I like George Pickens a lot, and really, if he was on any other team as the number one in the same situation, I'd be saying the same thing. So I think George Pickens, a little bit by default, but also maturity, that he's going to have a great season. And at 41 overall here, we're talking third, fourth round of drafts. I think this is great value. He could be a great deal at his average draft position.
Yeah, I like Pickens a lot. I do think you just completely disrespected my boy Roman Wilson over there. He's gonna be the clear-cut wide receiver too. But
it'll take him some time. It'll take him some time.
Pickens is in a good spot. He does have a better quarterback situation now, so I do like that. I think he'll be a sneaky play. He could end up being a wide receiver too this upcoming season. Of course, he's going to develop into an amazing receiver, and then somehow something happens, and then he has to leave because that's what happens in Pittsburgh.
You're right.
Those receivers go nuts on the field, and they go nuts off the field. But I have someone just ahead of him actually at wide receiver 29, and Amari Cooper will stay in that same division. Man, does Amari Cooper just get straight up disrespected? I think about Amari Cooper a lot as far as great route technician, great hands. He does have some situations where he kind of, if he's not in the game in the moment, he kind of lapses. I saw it firsthand as a Dallas Cowboy fan who watched him for a few years, but the talent's there, and continuously he has been disrespected. And part of my concern, or at least one concern I could see people having, is the whole Deshaun Watson thing. Like, how does this going to play out? Because no one knows exactly what's going to happen with Watson. He has not been the Watson that we all hoped, but consistently does Amari Cooper show up? He's wide receiver 29 on this ranking. Last year he was wide receiver 20. The year before that was wide receiver 10. The year before that was like wide receiver 27. So he's kind of in that wide receiver 2 with potential of being a low wide receiver 1. And again, a lot of it's going to have to be, what does Deshaun look like? Can Deshaun actually stay healthy? Can he actually have some resemblance of what he was last year, in his last year in the Texans? But Amari Cooper, again, he doesn't need to be force-fed a lot of targets because he's still going to produce. He's still going to get 1,000 yards. He's still going to get, plenty of touchdowns. I would love to see more out of him, but that's not something you're always going to see out of him. But I mean, last year was 5. The year before that, he had 9 touchdowns. The year before that was 8 touchdowns. So like he can score. So for example, wide receiver 30 was Pickens. You had wide receiver 29 was Cooper. I'd still give the edge to Cooper. I think that ranking is right on, because I think Cooper does end up being a better receiver. But Pickens may be the guy because of Russell Wilson. I mean, that quarterback play may just differentiate those two. You can't go wrong with either one of them in that spot.
Yeah, I tell you what, I like Cooper a lot there. I agree with that. I still would put Cooper above Pickens. For me, this is like I said, a leap of faith, a judgment call for Pickens. But Amari Cooper, the proof is in the pudding. He's just so reliable. He's been a great receiver his whole career. So even when we talk about tight ends, David Njoku, I do hold that a little bit higher, like the Deshaun Watson factor, for a guy like Njoku than I do Amari Cooper. I just think he's their number one. He's going to get fed the ball, and look what he ended up doing. I understand it was with Joe Flacco, but he still, age 29, 30, the last game or two versus Houston, the eruption he had, breaking history there versus the Texans. So I still think he's a walking bomb, and both of these guys may be, especially Pickens may be better in like a half PPR, best ball kind of format, but I still really like both of them. And yes, I would definitely still put Cooper above Pickens by one spot. I think is good enough. So they're not too far ahead. I wouldn't be surprised if Pickens had a better stat year due to health or just coming of his own. So neck and neck. My next guy, I'm not sliding too far down the board here. I'm going number 33, Hollywood Brown. So I know Xavier Worthy just got drafted to this team. We're comparing him to Tyreek Hill. They still have Rashee Rice, but listen, let's be in a realistic world here. Rashee Rice is probably going to get some kind of suspension, whether it be 4 or 6 games. Who knows if he's in the doghouse there, how that's going to shake up. At the same time, yeah, Xavier Worthy, I'm not really buying that he's going to beat Tyreek Hill walking in and steal the whole show. It might happen, he might have glimpses there. It might get better with time. Second year, middle of the season, who knows? But for right now, going into 2024, I think the guy I want to have there by far is Hollywood Brown. If you haven't paid attention in the offseason on Twitter, I've seen pictures on Twitter of Patrick Mahomes chilling courtside at NBA games with Hollywood Brown. These two guys are definitely meshing, gelling well in the offseason. When you look at Patrick Mahomes' interviews, he can't wait to get on the field with Hollywood Brown, raves about him. So I think number one, that's a good sign, writing on the wall there. When we look at the first 3 years of Hollywood Brown's career, he averaged 7 touchdowns with Baltimore. Then it kind of fell off. He went to Arizona, kind of didn't really stay healthy. Touchdowns were down, receptions were down, and that's the last glimmer we got of Hollywood Brown was with Arizona with Kyler Murray, who only had 24 touchdowns throwing in his last 19 games. So just over 1 touchdown a game for Kyler Murray. I think when he flips the script and comes here to Kansas City, things are going to be absolutely different. This is also when he was in Baltimore. We saw, I think it was over 130, 140 targets in a year. So this is a volume hog. He can be, at least. I'm not saying it's money in the bank that he's going to get, 110 or more catches, but it really doesn't need to do that in an offense. It is similar to like a Marquise Flowers in Baltimore. I don't think he's going to light the world up as far as targets, but he's going to do his damage. That's the kind of player that Hollywood Brown is. And you know what? When we look at touchdowns, that number from last year, 4, what was it? 4 there. Yeah, 4 touchdowns. I thought it was 7. Keenan Allen above. I was going to say 7's about what. Yeah, 4 touchdowns is low for Marquise Brown. I think he's a walking bomb. He'll definitely have some long 40, 50-yard catches that turn into touchdowns. This is somebody that George Pickens, you might get more volume this year, but I think with Marquise Brown, you're not banking on the home run hit like you kind of have done with Pickens. I think Marquise Brown is a little bit more has a little bit more consistency to his game. He can be that target hog. He as far as health, he had injuries last 2 years. If he can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a tremendous year, maybe close to 7 or 8 touchdowns. obviously break that 1,000-yard mark with 100 catches. So I really think that this is their number one receiver. And hey, maybe Rashee Rice, doesn't get a suspension. He's not suspended yet. Maybe Xavier Worthy does step up and the Chiefs continue to spread the ball. But if I'm looking at the guy who I want as the pass catcher, the wide receiver of that team, to me, it's got to be Marquise Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, I like Hollywood Brown. Obviously, clearly the reason why Hollywood Brown's hanging out courtside is because Rashee Rice is too busy doing other things. But it's giving Hollywood Brown a chance to really gel, which is good for anybody who has them in Dynasty, and of course anybody who's going to redraft. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I'm going to go with the next receiver who I think is pretty low on this list is Tank Dell, wide receiver 26. I know Dell dealt with that injury. That was a big issue. A lot of people were upset with how that happened because of a stupid block on a goal line. Like, it just should never have happened, especially at his size. I think he's like 165 pounds. So there was a lot of frustration, from Texans fans and anybody in fantasy. So, but I will say this, looking at this list, Nico Collins was a lot higher, right? He got paid as the wide receiver 1. And well-deserved. I think Nico finally got that chance to really show up and have the chance to be the wide receiver 1. But it wasn't always that way. And I think with Tank Dell and the fact that CJ Stroud came into the league with him, vouched for him, wanted him, and they had that connection. It took a little bit of time, but between I think it was like week 9 to 13 or something, or 9 through 12, they were phenomenal together. So did Nico. Nico showed up, but Tank was just on fire in those 4 games before the injury, to the point where I think he would have finished really strong. Last year, he finished wide receiver 39, but he missed almost half the season. So you look at his stats here, Dell's finished with 75 targets, 47 receptions, 7 touchdowns. Okay. Let him play another 6 games there. Man, that kid would have been a phenomenal. And I trust that, I've seen some of the mini camps, I've seen the training camps. He looks good. His route running is as good as it can be. One of the best, cleanest route runners out there. I mean, he makes you look silly. I know sizes will always be a concern with him. Can he stay healthy, right? Can he take a beating all season long? But I'm not going to look into that too much until there's like a track record. I still think he deserves the respect that he, started to see last season. I had a lot of shares in Dynasty with Tank Dell, because a lot of people were, his size was a big concern. But I'm glad I grabbed him when I could. I used him as a couple trade baits when I got a couple better receivers when he was on that hot streak. But as far as redraft, I'm not staying away from him. I am not staying away from Nico either. I think this offense is going to be phenomenal with CJ. They're going to pass a lot. I think both these guys can be wide receiver 1s in the league, just because of the opportunities they're going to get. So I like him at wide receiver 20. He's cheaper, so I'm definitely going to go Dell over Nico.
And you know what, Steve? We couldn't mention everybody on this list, but I'm glad you mentioned Dell. I couldn't agree more. I got him last year in a dynasty in my 4th round. So my last round pick, I picked Tank Dell. So what a great pick that was, right? And here we are, 2024. We're still kind of sleeping on him, and I think 2 reasons, kind of due to health, right? Is he's a smaller guy. He's focused on not so much, I wouldn't say a burner, but agility, speed, and getting open. He's a great route runner. All that now. Does that really get affected by the injury right now? As the season's getting started, ramping up, it doesn't look like it is. And he right now is said to be really healthy. So that's a great sign. And as far as both of these guys, Nico Collins and Tank Dell, I think another reason they're kind of, I wouldn't say Nico slept on, but Tank here is low, right? And I think a reason because of that is like they brought in Stephon Diggs, right? Like, oh, he might be the number 1. To me, it's not even close. I'd rather have both of these guys over Stephon Diggs right now, man.
Diggs is ranked higher, I think.
You think this is last year for Diggs?
Oh, Diggs is a rental. I hate to say it that way because it sounds bad. Like, these are human beings. But I think they got him for this year.
Yeah.
They don't need to keep him after this year,
Right.
And it's good for Diggs too. He kind of needed to get out of Buffalo.
Yeah, I agree with you. And hey, this is a team going for it all right now. So who knows? Maybe Stephon Diggs even has a nice year too. I wouldn't put it out of the question. He's a great player still. So yeah, all 3 of these guys, could have definitely routes to success. But Tank Dell, when we're talking about average draft position, is my guy too. I couldn't back that anymore, Steve. So I like him a lot. My last guy I'm going to give you is coming down here to number 37 all the way down, man, for Chris Godwin. It seems like not too long ago we talked about Chris Godwin, had him in the rankings a few years ago as a top 20, maybe even a top 15 receiver, right? But right now, going into 2024, he's going to be 8th year. He's all the way down here at 37th as far as wide receivers and 63rd overall off the board. So Chris Godwin is definitely, I wouldn't say slept on. We all know who he is, but he's definitely down there packed in the rankings. And of course, there was some few things that had happened in 2022. Chris Godwin tore an ACL, so maybe that kind of attributed to the down year in 2023. Last year, they had Canales as their offensive coordinator. He's now gone. So we got word that Chris Godwin is going to move back into the slot where he had previous success. So I'm really, liking the news that are coming so far. Chris Godwin, this is his going to be second full season off that ACL tear. A lot of guys, when they tear their ACL, big injury like that, it takes more than a full year to get back to health. So Chris Godwin is somebody who I think that we're sleeping on in the community because we look at last year's production. Mike Evans was still doing it at a high rate. A lot of people didn't think the Tampa Bay Bucks were going to do that, myself included. I didn't think Baker had all that in him. So, last year, maybe we expected Chris Godwin to do a little bit more with how much success the team had. But Mike Evans is still there. Mike Evans is a great player, but Mike Evans is still getting older and older. So maybe there's durability issues with Evans that helps Chris Godwin get even more looks. But bottom line, as long as he comes back into the slot, I think the chance for targets, receptions, yards, all that really increases. His production increases. And we can kind of flash back to those 2-3 years ago and look at those rankings and find some validity in those former year rankings because like I said, this guy is definitely, we have seen it. He's getting older. He's in his 8th year this year, and maybe that's scaring some people away too. But when we talk about consistency when a guy's on the field, I think Chris Godwin is a model of consistency, and I'm surprised he's this low. So I'm backing him at 37th in the wide receivers, and that would be 63rd overall. Pretty late for me, but I think this is a surefire fringe wide receiver 2 and 3, somewhere between there. Started off as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. So that's my last guy, Chris Godwin.
I don't hate that pick at all. There's a couple other people we could have talked about here, but I think you went with a good one there. Godwin, even though he didn't have as great of a season as I think most people were used to, but he still finished wide receiver 29 last season. And a lot of it contributed with the lack of touchdowns. You see, he had 2 touchdowns last season.
Mm-hmm.
He still had 83 receptions, over 1,000 yards. Give him 4 or 5 more touchdowns. He was no longer wide receiver 29. He's probably wide receiver 19.
Right.
Like that's where he should be, is right in that top 20 still. I think he still should be there. It's tough because you got a lot of great young receivers coming into the league, which is why someone like Godwin's starting to fall. But I think he'll be a solid flex wide receiver 2 throughout the season. So I like that move a lot. My last guy is right behind Godwin, and this is not a trends podcast without me mentioning Keon Coleman. He's wide receiver 38 right now in redraft. A lot of uncertainty, right? Nobody knows what this Buffalo offense is going to look like. But when you have Josh Allen at quarterback, Keon is the wide receiver 1. I know there's this whole Claypool looks great. Like, stop it. Keon Coleman is the wide receiver 1. And just because I think being a rookie, he didn't measure very well in the combine. I still think him being drafted pretty high in the 2nd round does give him some draft capital, which I think is going to be a big play. Keon Coleman is an amazing receiver. I think his route, his big body ability to just get up and grab it at the football at the highest point. He's able to be, I think, a strong red zone threat. I think this is going to be somebody Josh Allen's going to love. I mean, he's already beloved by Buffalo fans already just because of his press conferences. Like, Keon's got that personality. He has the wide receiver 1. I wouldn't say diva, but just that personality. Like, he's got that it factor that you just fall in love with, that he's going to, be in front of the camera quite often. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of uncertainty. We're not sure how this offense plays out. I think when they did the OC switch last season, Allen wasn't throwing as often. It really became the James Cook and Josh Allen running show. So that could still be something you got to consider. But with that said, there's a whole new wide receiver room. Shakir's the only one that's coming back that has some value. Curtis Samuel's there. You got Claypool, who is looking good in training camp, and then Keon. I love this move for Keon Coleman. I think he will be. I guarantee you on my teams when I start redraft season real soon.
Now, how if you like him so much, what because this is 62, 63, 66, 65 off the board. Now, if we're talking 12-person league, this is 6th round. So
yeah.
5th, 6th round, somewhere in between there. Would you reach to 4th, 3rd?
No. So I think about I'm in only one redraft. I do a lot of dynasty. I do one redraft. Well, okay, I have 2, but one that really is one I've been in for over 10 years. That one I know my league mates very well. Like that's I think an advantage. You got to know your league mates. You got to know who they draft, who they like, who they don't like.
Yeah.
And just based off the fact that I know what these guys are about, names, some of these guys I call them casuals. It is what it is. They're casuals. A lot of them are. There are a few that are really into fantasy football that I do have to keep an eye on, but a lot of them are casuals. And I know that they're not going to go after him. They'll grab somebody else who's been a name in the league for a few years. Like that and that's okay. I think I can still get him in the 6th, 5th, 6th round. Possibly even later. Now, if you're in a league that is very data driven and do all kinds of analysis, watch videos like this, listen to our podcast or listen to others, like Keon Coleman may not fall down to the wide receiver 38 spot. Like he may not, there's a few players I would put him above, not many because this list is tough, but I'd put him over Xavier Worthy. I'd put him over Calvin Ridley. There's a few of these players that you see this ranking that I would put him over. And you and I could literally have a full podcast about these rankings where you and I would make some changes because there's quite a few I'd change myself. But I think 5th or 6th is a good spot. I wouldn't overreach for him.
Yeah.
The reason why we mentioned these receivers are these are players that are ranked lower that you could get at a good price that would actually end up being better than where you drafted them. Like ADP plays a big factor. So if I were to do an honorable mention, like Deontay Johnson at 43 is crazy to me.
Yeah. And as it goes down, man, maybe we'll have time to do another podcast. Look at some of these names.
There was a lot that I saw on this list, and I'm like, I would make some changes.
Yeah.
But that's what we're here for. We mentioned some of these players that you could probably snag in a late round that end up being stars for you.
Right. And I couldn't agree more about Coleman, man. When we talk about the grand scheme of things, look how many times like Justin Jefferson, these rookies not only the rookies, but anytime you have a chance for somebody to step up and be a wide receiver 1, how many wide receiver 1s are you getting here after, 2nd, 3rd round? Not many, if at all. So in the 5th round, Steve and I both project Keon Coleman to run away with the wide receiver 1 job. So we have a lot of confidence in him. And if you do yourself, then you're getting a wide receiver 1 in round 5 or round 6 if you're in a 12 or more person league. So this is a great draft spot for Keon Coleman, great draft spot for all of these guys. And yes, absolutely. We wanted to look at average draft position and find diamonds in the rough and find guys who you should have faith in this fantasy season. So thank you all for tuning in, for watching our show. We will see you the next time on Trends, and enjoy your rest of your evening.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.